The slip happened in an instant, a single miscalculated step that changed everything. The ice beneath his boot had been hidden, disguised beneath a thin layer of snow that gave no warning of its treachery. One moment, he was moving forward with confidence, each step a testament to the endurance and skill he had built over the previous days. The next, his foot slid, his balance lost in a heartbeat, and his body pitched forward, fighting gravity in a battle he could not fully control. Time seemed to slow as he scrambled instinctively, arms flailing for purchase on the unforgiving slope. In that brief moment, he realized how fragile survival really was. The mountain, indifferent and imposing, made no exceptions. Preparation, courage, and determination, all of which had carried him this far, were suddenly insufficient. A single misstep, a fraction of misjudgment, could undo days of careful planning. He felt the cold reality of vulnerability like a sharp blade against his skin. One moment of carelessness, and the mountain could claim him without hesitation. His hands grasped at the snow, fingers clawing for stability, but the slope offered little mercy. Every instinct screamed to regain control, yet the movement of his body over the ice reminded him that human strength alone could only go so far. The slip was more than a physical challenge. It was a confrontation with the humbling truth that he was not in charge. The mountain was a force beyond comprehension, and even experience and skill could not render him immune to its power. As he regained his footing, heart pounding and breath ragged, he caught sight of his supplies tumbling down the slope. Packs of food, equipment, and the tools that had been lifelines were now swept away by gravity and the ice, disappearing into the white abyss below. Shock struck him immediately, followed by a surge of panic. The fragility of everything he had relied on hit him with full force. Survival, he realized, was not merely about skill or courage. It was about awareness, constant vigilance, and the understanding that even the smallest error could have catastrophic consequences. The slip also forced him to confront his own assumptions. Confidence, he understood now, could be dangerous. Overestimating control or underestimating risk could erase progress in a single moment. The mountain did not negotiate with intention or planning. It acted according to its own laws, indifferent to human effort or desire. This moment of carelessness illuminated a universal truth of survival. The margin between safety and disaster is often razor thin, and vigilance is the only reliable safeguard. In the aftermath, he moved forward more cautiously than ever before. Each step was deliberate, measured, and conscious, informed by the lesson of his fall. The mountain had reminded him, in the starkest possible way, that survival depended not only on preparation and courage, but on humility, respect, and an unwavering attention to every action. That single slip, brief and almost trivial in appearance, became a defining moment, a stark demonstration of how fragile life can be in a world ruled by forces far greater than oneself. The loss of his supplies hit him with a force he hadn't anticipated. For days, each piece of gear, every carefully rationed pack of food, and every essential tool had been his lifeline. They were the tangible evidence of preparation, the buffer between survival and catastrophe. Now, as he watched them tumble down the icy slope, swept away by gravity and hidden ice, the fragility of everything he relied upon became painfully clear. In an instant, the security he had built up over 4 days vanished, leaving him exposed to the mountain in a way he had never experienced. Panic rose immediately, a raw, physical reaction to the sudden vulnerability. He felt the pounding of his heart in his chest, the sharp intake of cold, shallow breaths, and the tightening of his muscles as adrenaline surged through him. Without his supplies, he was forced to confront the immediate reality of hunger, exposure, and lack of essential tools. What had seemed like calculated risk and measured preparation now felt inadequate. The mountain, indifferent to human effort, had reminded him that even meticulous planning could be undone in a single, fleeting moment. The emotional impact of losing his supplies was as severe as the practical consequences. Every ration lost, every tool gone, symbolized the thin line separating survival from disaster. Memories of the care he had taken to pack efficiently to secure every item came back sharply, and he realized how quickly all of it had been rendered meaningless. The mountain had a way of humbling even the most cautious climber, and he felt that humility as a cold weight pressing on his chest. It was a lesson in fragility, a reminder that nothing on this mountain could be taken for granted. He took stock of what remained: the clothes on his back, his tent, a few small essentials that he had managed to secure. Every action from this point forward had to account for scarcity. Meals would need to be smaller, every calorie rationed. Movements would need to be deliberate, conserving energy wherever possible. The margin for error had narrowed drastically, and he understood that survival now demanded not only endurance, but heightened awareness and adaptability. The mountain had stripped away the comfort of preparation, forcing him to operate on instinct and resourcefulness alone. This loss also reshaped his mental approach. Confidence had to be replaced with caution. Courage was no longer enough. He had to recognize his vulnerability and respect the mountain's power in a way he hadn't fully appreciated before. Each decision, each step, each exertion of effort required conscious calculation. The mountain had shown him that survival is fragile, dependent not only on preparation but on constant vigilance and the ability to adapt when circumstances shift unexpectedly. In that moment, he understood that every slip, every lost supply, and every misjudgment could carry consequences far greater than he had imagined. The fragility of survival was no longer a concept, it was a lived reality, etched into every fiber of his body and mind as he moved forward, determined to endure despite the sudden and stark reduction of his resources. The sudden loss of his supplies forced him into a confrontation with vulnerability he hadn't fully experienced until now. For days, he had relied on careful planning, preparation, and the sense of control that came with carrying everything he needed. Each food pack, tool, and piece of gear had been a buffer between survival and disaster. A small reassurance that he could endure whatever the mountain might throw at him. Now, with those lifelines gone, that reassurance vanished, leaving only raw exposure and a sobering awareness of how easily circumstances could spiral beyond his control. The mountain had stripped him bare, showing him that survival was far more delicate than he had imagined. Panic surged immediately, a physical reaction to the sudden vulnerability. His heart raced, breath became shallow and rapid, and adrenaline shot through his veins, both energizing him and clouding his mind. Fear and frustration competed for dominance, and for a moment, the clarity he had maintained during prior days seemed to slip away. He realized how quickly preparation and experience could be undone by a single misstep. The mountain had reminded him that no matter how strong, skilled, or determined a climber might be, control is always partial, fragile, and easily disrupted. He could feel the weight of every lost item, as if it had physical mass pressing down on him. The supplies were not just practical tools, they represented the hours of planning, the thoughtfulness in packing, and the confidence he had carried into this climb. Their disappearance transformed confidence into fear and complacency into stark awareness. He was now at the mercy of both the mountain and the limits of his remaining resources. Every decision mattered, every movement had consequences, and the margin for error had shrunk dramatically. The loss of his supplies became a tangible lesson in humility, teaching him that survival depended on constant vigilance and adaptability rather than simple courage or determination. The practical consequences compounded the mental strain. Meals would have to be smaller, energy conserved more carefully, and every action weighed against its potential cost. Tools he had relied on for navigation, shelter, and sustenance were gone, forcing him to improvise and rethink even basic tasks. The mountain had stripped him of comfort and security, leaving him to operate with heightened awareness and careful deliberation. He realized that preparation is only as effective as one's ability to adapt when conditions change, and that resilience involves both mental and physical flexibility. By the end of the day, he understood that this loss, as devastating as it was, contained a lesson he could not ignore. Survival is never guaranteed. The mountain does not reward confidence or prior planning alone, demands respect, attentiveness, and humility. Every climber is vulnerable, no matter how skilled or prepared, and the margin between safety and disaster is narrow and unforgiving. The loss of his supplies had crystallized this truth, leaving him aware that each step forward required not only endurance and courage, but an acute awareness of the fragility of survival itself. It was a lesson etched into his body-mind, and every cautious movement he would make in the days ahead. The loss of his supplies transformed every movement into a careful calculation. Every step, once taken with confidence, now carried the weight of potential consequence. The mountain, indifferent to his struggle, demanded that he respect its dangers in a way he hadn't before. Each misstep could lead to further loss, injury, or even death. The false security of having prepared in advance had vanished, leaving him to confront the reality that survival was a delicate balance, maintained only through vigilance, patience, and precise decision-making. Every choice, how to move, where to place a foot, how much energy to expend, became a matter of life and death. The fragility of survival made him hyper, aware of his body and surroundings. Fatigue, cold, and hunger were no longer minor discomforts but threats amplified by his lack of resources. He slowed his pace, measuring each motion, testing the stability of ice and snow before committing his weight. Even the simplest actions, like adjusting a strap or taking a sip of water, became deliberate exercises in caution. The mountain had forced him into a state of heightened awareness, where instinct alone could no longer guide him. Every movement required conscious thought. He learned that in this environment, hesitation was sometimes a shield and impulsive action could be fatal. Mental vigilance became as critical as physical caution. Panic could strike at any moment, and he felt the edges of fear pressing against his concentration. One lapse in focus could lead to slipping, twisting an ankle, or making an error in judgment that would have irreversible consequences. He had to maintain clarity, even as the mountain presented new obstacles, with every step hidden ice patches, loose rocks, and subtle changes in slope. The absence of his supplies, once a distant concern, now amplified every risk. He realized that survival was no longer about endurance alone. It was about constant mindfulness, self-control, and the ability to adapt to unforeseen circumstances with precision. The day also forced him to reconsider his priorities. Movements that might have been efficient but slightly risky were now unacceptable. Conserving energy, maintaining warmth, and protecting what little remained of his provisions became the central focus. Each step had to account not only for immediate safety, but for long-term sustainability. The mountain had shown him that survival is rarely about heroism or brute strength. It is about humility, patience, and respect for forces greater than oneself. Pride could lead to mistakes. Overconfidence could be fatal. He understood that vigilance and careful adaptation were the tools that allowed a person to continue in the face of adversity. By nightfall, exhaustion had settled into both body and mind, but it was tempered by a hard-earned awareness. The loss of his supplies had shattered his sense of security, but it had also sharpened his instincts and honed his judgment. He knew that the mountain would continue to test him, but each deliberate step, each conscious decision, was now an act of survival. The lesson was clear: survival is fragile, dependent not on courage alone, but on constant awareness, careful action, and the humility to respect the environment that could so easily undo human effort in a single instant. The sudden loss of his supplies forced him to confront a reality he had never fully appreciated. Survival on the mountain was not guaranteed, and the margin for error was razor thin. Every step he took now carried consequences far greater than before. Where previously he could rely on tools, food, and equipment to buffer him against danger, he was now stripped down to only what he wore and the skills he possessed. The mountain, indifferent and unforgiving, had made it clear that courage and determination alone were no longer enough. Survival demanded vigilance, patience, and the ability to adapt to changing circumstances with precision and care. He moved cautiously, acutely aware that even a minor slip could exacerbate his already precarious situation. The slope beneath his boots, previously a manageable challenge, became a source of constant concern. Ice hidden beneath layers of snow threatened to betray him at any moment. Loose rocks shifted under his weight. Every choice of where to place a foot or how to distribute his weight had to be calculated, deliberate, and conscious. The fragility of his position left no room for impulsive decisions. The mountain had stripped him of confidence, replacing it with a heightened awareness of risk and the necessity of careful action. Beyond the physical challenges, his mind became a constant battlefield. Fear and doubt threatened to overwhelm him, amplified by the stark isolation and the knowledge that one wrong move could undo everything. Without the reassurance of his lost supplies, every task, setting up camp, conserving energy, or even taking a sip of water, required careful thought. The psychological weight of vulnerability pressed on him, making fatigue more intense and every movement more deliberate. The mountain demanded mental resilience as much as physical endurance. Forcing him to remain vigilant even in moments of exhaustion, the loss of his supplies also reshaped his understanding of priorities. Where before he might have taken small risks for efficiency or speed, he now recognized that caution and sustainability were paramount. Conserving energy, protecting warmth, and maintaining balance became central to every decision. He had to think not just about the immediate consequences of each action, but about how each choice would affect his ability to survive over the coming hours and days. The mountain's lesson was clear: survival is fragile, and every advantage can be lost in an instant. Humility, respect, and deliberate attention were now essential tools. By the end of the day, exhaustion weighed heavily on both his body and mind, but it was tempered by a deep understanding of the mountain's demands. The loss of his supplies had shattered his sense of security, but it had also sharpened his instincts and focus. Every movement, every step, and every choice became an act of careful calculation. The lesson was indelible. Survival was not guaranteed by preparation, skill, or courage alone. It depended on vigilance, awareness, humility, and the relentless ability to adapt in the face of unpredictable and unforgiving conditions. The mountain had made it clear that even the smallest misjudgment could carry catastrophic consequences, and he knew that from this point on, every action would need to be deliberate, measured, and conscious. By the time night began to settle over the mountain, he understood a truth more profound than any storm or slip could teach. Survival was fragile, and it depended on more than just courage or physical strength. The loss of his supplies had stripped away the illusion of security he had carried, leaving him exposed not only to the elements, but to the relentless consequences of every choice he made. Each action, no matter how small, now carried weight. The mountain had a way of reminding climbers that even the best laid plans could unravel in an instant, and he felt the full impact of that lesson in every fiber of his body. The realization forced him to reassess his mindset. In the past, he had measured progress by distance climbed or obstacles overcome. Now, progress was measured by careful decisions and the ability to preserve what little he had left. Survival was no longer a test of endurance alone. It was a delicate balance, maintained by attention, patience, and humility. The mountain did not reward bravery or pride. It punished overconfidence and inattentiveness. He understood that even the smallest lapse in judgment could have catastrophic consequences. The fragility of life in this environment was stark, immediate, and unavoidable. The psychological impact of losing his supplies became increasingly evident as he moved forward. The fear of hunger, exposure, and lack of essential tools pressed on him relentlessly. Every rustle of snow, every shift in the wind, reminded him that he was vulnerable, that the mountain was indifferent, and that survival depended entirely on his own awareness and adaptability. The mountain had removed the buffer of security, forcing him to rely on discipline, foresight, and careful observation. Courage alone could not keep him alive. Vigilance and respect for the environment were now essential. Each decision he made required deliberate thought. Where to place his feet, how to ration the remaining provisions, and how to conserve energy became central concerns. He learned to move with caution, to anticipate danger before it appeared, and to consider the long-term consequences of every action. Even simple tasks like setting up camp or adjusting clothing became exercises in careful planning. The mountain had revealed that survival is not a matter of raw strength or heroism. It is a constant negotiation with risk, requiring patience, strategy, and humility. By the end of the day, exhaustion weighed heavily on his body, but it was tempered by a hard-earned awareness. The loss of supplies, the slip, and the relentless challenges of the climb had all contributed to an understanding that life in this environment was precarious. Survival was fragile, dependent not on courage alone, but on constant awareness, careful action, and respect for forces beyond human control. The mountain had shown him that every step, every movement, and every decision carried significance. It had stripped away illusions of invincibility and left him with a profound clarity. To endure, he would need to combine skill, vigilance, and humility, recognizing that even a single misjudgment could undo everything.